5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wah, 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 wah.
This is episode number 407 of WP Watercooler, a second helping of governance, the PHP Foundation.
The real Black Friday.
Brought to you by us over at WP Watercooler. Go to WPwatercooler.com/store and buy a cool shirt with my last name on it.
Those are real. They really exist.
And InMotion Hosting. Go to InMotionHosting.com to learn more. Check them out over at InMotion Hosting for 24/7 support, affordable prices, and learn how you can launch your website in minutes. I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me at Jason Tucker on Twitter. He's Steve Zangit.
He's not here today.
No, he's playing golf.
He's playing golf. Hi, I'm Say, and I make WordPress, Teach WordPress, Preach WordPress, Lament WordPress, sometimes at Say Read Media on all the things, but mostly Twitter.
And it's your boy Jason Cosper, aka Fat Mo Mike, back at it again on the world's most influential WordPress podcast.
You said it.
Speaking of which, go and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. We'd really appreciate it. And if you're the chatting sort, you can go and hang out with us on Discord. Go to wpwatercooler.com/Discord to hang out with us.
You don't have to pay a monthly fee, just FYI.
You don't have to pay a monthly fee.
It's free. And by free, we mean free.
All right, folks. So today we're going to be discussing Black Friday deals in WordPress.
Yeah! Yeah.
Thank you for coming and hang out with me.
The weirdest thing I've ever seen.
I just want to let you know that all you got to do is you just need to put in your affiliate links in the chat, and we will not share them, and it'll be fun. We'll have a great time.
We already broke Morten, who obviously does not listen to the show enough. Did you think we got less weird? Because, yeah.
No, man, we just added an intro to the weird. We're all good.
Yeah.
With like random commentary on the intro you all
Yeah.
made yourself.
Exactly. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
We bring, I figured it out finally, we bring the Great British Bake Off energy to the tech field.
Oh no.
That's what we do.
That sounds about right.
Last night, I just realized Noel Fielding and I have a lot in common. Okay. Who you might better know is Old Greg. Tech people. Anyway. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone's like, yeah, Old Greg. Okay. Let's talk about why we're really here today. It's not Black Friday.
No.
It is a really interesting news drop announcement from the PHP Foundation. That was this week, right? My time meter is like really off. I think it was this week.
It's a weird week.
It
was fourth quarter. It was fourth quarter.
Yeah, recently. So JetBrains put out a post talking about basically like the next stage of the PHP, the next stage of PHP, and how it's going to be governed and run as it is an open source framework. Like other open source softwares, some of us may know and love, and some of us, Morten, may know and not love anymore. But sorry, not funny enough. Okay. The point here is the PHP Foundation is starting a thing. And one of the top mentioned company, I looked, they're mentioned first, is Automatic. Friend of WordPress. Automatic.
800-pound gorilla of WordPress.
I think it's like the 800-pound gorilla in the room of WordPress is really what it is. So
Are we talking about Jetpack or are we talking about WordPress?
Jetpack, Automatic, So we thought it was really interesting that Automatic was like, oh yeah, we see how a structure like this could work for PHP. So we thought we'd talk about that a little bit and see if perhaps we could extrapolate that and see if there are other situations in which something that seems to be going like a good idea for the PHP Foundation could be extended. But first we got to understand what they're doing. So we brought on someone who knows what he's talking about.
For once. Wow, we finally got an expert. Look at that.
Like,
hey, Morten, how you doing?
Yeah.
Hi. I'm Morten. I was not featured in the spectacular intro.
No, we don't do that to our guests.
I am no longer a contributor to the open source WordPress project. That is my intro.
Yeah. And you passed on your essentials training baton to Ali.
Eventually.
I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I just realized because I was about to say it out loud and I was like, whoops. Niemans? Is it Niemans? Niemans.
I'm just guessing.
My apologies, Ali. I don't say your name out loud ever, turns out. Just in my head.
I believe the name is Your Friendly Neighborhood Pain in the Ass.
Yeah, that one's easier to pronounce.
That's much easier to pronounce.
It's easier to pronounce that. But yeah, so you've really moved on. But that's why I thought it might be cool to ask you about this one, because really what we're talking about here is a bigger structure than WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're talking about PHP. That's way bigger than WordPress.
What WordPress wants to be.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts? What were your first thoughts upon reading this? And how hard did your eyes hurt a lot or a little bit after they rolled back into your head?
So reading that article, the very first thought that struck me was, oh my God, this is like a panic move.
For PHP?
Like, you read it and you go, oh, what happened was the one key link that was holding the whole thing together was like, fuck it, I'm going to do something else. And then everyone was like, ah!
Wait, we really needed that guy.
Together, how the hell did we save this? And they just scrambled. Like, it's literally, you read it and you go like, okay, so this is a company that goes, shit. Our entire business is predicated on this thing living on. What do we do? Go find some blog post some random dude wrote like 8 years ago and say, this is a good idea. Call all the other people whose life depends on PHP still functioning, make a foundation, commit $100,000 to it just off the bat, just to get some money into it, and then immediately say, if you're a PHP developer, by all means apply for this money right now. So all I'm reading there is like the ship is burning on fire. There's a guy with an axe on the bottom, like chopping holes in the bottom of it. You know, there's like sharks with tanks on their faces shooting at it.
Is there lava? I think there's lava.
Before this explodes, we should leave. Sorry, not leave. We should definitely try to save it, right?
Yeah.
So the result of that, reading, this is pure conjecture based on the article and how it's written. Result of that is they've done the only rational thing that anyone can do in a situation like that, which is to say, we make a foundation. We get a bunch of people together. They all pool money together, and then we start funding contributors, because otherwise the whole thing falls apart. And then to make a foundation, we go to all the companies whose business is predicated on the existence or the continued existence of this programming language, and we say, hey, if you have a vested interest, show up with cash, right? And one of the key pieces there is, if you look at the article, it says that JetBrains, who published the article, is committing $100,000. And then they say, we expect that we will have a running budget of $300,000. And there's a list of like 10 other companies that are much bigger than JetBrains. Yet somehow JetBrains is contributing 1/3 of the money. And as Say pointed out, when you go look at the list, you'll see that the other contributors are people.
Yeah, they're
or small companies. Right.
Well, here, I'll link you to so the cool thing about what they kind of glommed onto is the Open Collective, which is basically like a shell, a pre-made shell that organizations like this can kind of use as their, I believe is it actually the fiscal sponsor? I think it might actually be the fiscal sponsor, but it's basically like the governance sponsor and organizational component of the foundation. And so you can really, it's all open, which is very cool. And you can go on there and you can go see who's contributed, how much they've contributed. And it has financial contributions and I believe code contributions also. So you can see both of those things. So I mean, in terms of PHP, besides the fact that this should have probably been done a little while ago, it seems like this could be really a good thing, right? For PHP, because this is a somewhat it's basically like crowd-funded, a crowd-funded nonprofit, a crowd-funded foundation. One of the,
when you, based on the announcement, the whole purpose of the creation of this foundation is to fund open source contribution,
Right.
right?
Was
Key being
was the
fund,
guy, what was his
pay
name?
the people who do the work, right? And they
Yeah.
even say like you can apply for full-time or part-time funding, and anyone can apply. So what they're saying is we have now, after X number of years, acknowledged that core contribution to the project has actual monetary value, and we want to remunerate the people for doing it because it's actual work, right? Which is the struggle that the open source community in general has right now, which is in large part the internet and especially the web stands and falls on voluntary contributions from developers, yet somehow some companies are deriving enormous wealth from those
or
contributions.
sponsored contributions, because like, for example, with the PHP, Nikita Popov was working for JetBrains. So I'm assuming that 100,000 was just essentially that person's salary.
Probably.
And they're like, well, we're just taking this salary and we're going to put it over here. So if we were to extrapolate how that could possibly work for another WordPress foundation or a similar foundation, that would really just mean taking the money that you put towards the employee that you have working on core contributions and putting that into a pool where you would have less influence, but it would in theory be the same amount of work being done on the code, since that person was being paid as if they were, a full-time person, and could be combined with more people doing that, since in theory it would be funded by the collective, so there would be more positions available. And in what makes a lot of sense to me is that those people would then work together for the foundation, as opposed to be working separately, contributing with these they work for a company, but they're also a core contributor, so they're also part of that team. So that real split that I feel can't help but split people's loyalties, but also really leads directly into the issue of control. And is the team being able to make the best decisions for the code, or are they making the best decisions, and the project, or are they making the best decisions for the company that actually cuts their paycheck? So this takes that out of the equation by having that money go to the foundation, which then pays the contributors.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a model for this already in the OpenJS Foundation, right? So the OpenJS Foundation was the JavaScript Foundation and the Node Foundation that merged in 2017, I believe. And the reason why they did that was they recognized two things. Number one, they didn't have proper models for funding the people who were building the tools. And number two, they don't have a model for funding the infrastructure necessary for things to keep running. So what they did was they said, look, we'll collect money from the people that actually make money off JavaScript or Node. And then we will take it into a huge pot, and then we'll have a foundation that doles out that money to say, oh, you're running some server that runs some sort of essential feature that everyone is using on the web, then we'll pay for that server so that we know that it keeps running even if you don't want to do it anymore, right? Or so that you don't have to mow lawns to pay for the server. Or
so you will want to do it more.
Yeah.
So you will keep doing it.
But it's not, the life and death of the thing is no longer contingent on a single person doing it, right?
Right,
because
and that's the bus factor.
Foundation is funding it, and they'll be able to fund someone else to take over if necessary, and they'll fund the infrastructure, right? So that if there's a flood, like we're having where I'm at right now, and then all of a sudden a server farm goes down because it's full of water, then they'll be like, well, we have the money to move the data. Right. Whereas right now, a lot of these things are just, they stand and fall on individual contributors being willing to just contribute endless time and money into it. So this is the responsible way of dealing with the problem. And even though, I'm saying, they clearly spun this up in panic, and it's very, very rusty and very, very unfinished, it's still a very clear signal that when you have an open source project that isn't properly governed, if a single key person pulls out of that project, then the whole thing might fall apart. And this type of thing shouldn't be done like this, right? It should be done when it's not dangerous.
What were to happen? I don't know if I've never really thought about this because I don't like thinking about the bus factor, right? And Steve, who's not here today, always likes to call it the lottery factor. If you were to win the lottery tomorrow, you would be, bounce, versus if you got hit by a bus and you would bounce. But that's really the scenario, right? That's the bus factors. This is one person is the one, what's that called? The point of failure, this one point of failure
Right.
gets eliminated from the system and everything falls down.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it in terms of the head, our benevolent dictator, the head of the project, but for reals,
Yeah.
what
So
will happen if obviously the lottery's not going to affect him, but if
I've asked-
something were to happen to him and like there's no,
there's a
that's a
succession
real
plan.
problem.
There's a succession plan.
Oh,
I've
okay.
got-
Is it succession
I've
plan?
asked multiple people about this who know, and they say there's a succession plan. I don't think anyone is clear on what it is, or whoever knows what it is not going to say it, because that in
Right.
itself would be a kind of risky. But there apparently is a responsible succession plan in existence, as there should be. I mean, it's a huge thing. And the thing is, keep in mind,
I'd be
Matt runs a giant multi-billion-dollar company.
Right.
You can't run a multi-billion-dollar company without a succession plan. But the question
Well,
then
I
becomes, is
meant
the succession
more-
plan tied to the company or to the open source project, right?
Right,
And
yeah,
my
I
assumption
meant
is it
more-
will be both.
what impact would that have? Obviously, Automatic is going to have, their plans in place. So less worried about Automatic
Mhm.
and more in theory of, the project itself, which has had kind of Matt as the North Star for forever. I mean, obviously you've got Josefa, who would, I'm sure, step up, but she is already the executive director. I don't know if she'd step into the benevolent dictator spot. Like that doesn't or we'd elect a new benevolent dictator. No. But
Do we just pull Nason out of cold storage?
Nathan's too busy working for Facebook or the government or both, I think.
Right.
to do
probably
any of
both because they're the same. Anyway, yeah. So really, I've talked about this to various people, not really on the air, just the idea of why the WordPress Foundation doesn't do something like this, as opposed to just holding the copyright and then having, I don't know if there's a name for it. Maybe Morten. What is the name for the model that is it just like public-private partnership, private-open partnership? Like this privately funded, company-funded, sponsored contributor model. Like, what is that called?
I don't know if it has a name. It probably does. I just don't know it.
Yeah, I don't know
I
it
think
either.
historically, there's a reason why the foundation doesn't do this, and it's because the foundation was specifically created just to protect the trademark, and they would
Right.
have to change it. And the function of the foundation is the trademark governance itself. And it's interesting because people keep saying there's this unclarity around it, right? Because in other communities, the foundation does something else. So
Right.
everyone's like, why doesn't the WordPress Foundation do that? And then the answer is always the same, which is that's not what the foundation does. But no one has ever gone out and said, look, I will explain it to you. These are the legal papers that say this is what's happening. But basically, the foundation just protects the trademark, and that's its role. And the foundation is just a piece of paper in a lockbox somewhere in a lawyer office, right? And it's basically just Matt that just controls the trademark. And
Right.
we can discuss that until the end of time. It doesn't matter. The bigger question is, why hasn't if you look at what's happening with the PHP Foundation right now, that's a foundation that's spun up in panic, right? You are in a situation where things are falling apart, so you have to do something quickly. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is when everything is stable and secure, you spin up a foundation and you start managing the project in a responsible way so that if something were to happen, you already have things in place. Now, if you go back and look, there's this really interesting panel discussion about the launch of the OpenJS Foundation that happened at the JavaScript, what's it called? There was a huge JavaScript conference in Berlin in 2017. I was there, and they had this panel discussion about the OpenJS Foundation. In that, JSConf EU is called, 2017. So in that, they say one of the main benefits of creating the foundation was it provides an ability for the foundation to go into negotiations with other companies on behalf of everything. To say that, oh, so we want to enter into some sort of meaningful partnership with Microsoft or Adobe or Amazon, whatever, some big company. The big company will come back and say, I can't enter into a partnership with an open source project because the open source project doesn't exist. It's just a bunch of contributors, right? But when you have a foundation, you can have a meaningful negotiation with other entities to have collaborative partnerships. And what changed for them was instead of acting defensively all the time about everything, they could act proactively and say, we see a problem on the horizon, we can actually go and work on this before it happens, right? that's one of the key pieces to this. It's not so much about taking control away from some people and giving it to others as turning the project into a viable project that can operate within the economic framework that exists in the rest of the world, right? And then you get the whole political side, which is open source. An open source project can't speak for itself, right? So Automatic speaks on behalf of WordPress
Right.
in the EU.
And
right?
they
don't
recently
speak
did that.
on behalf of WordPress. They speak on behalf of Automatic.
Wait,
And there's no way
didn't
they
they
can
recently-
speak.
Didn't they recently actually speak? Wasn't there something that just came out that Automatic was contributing to, where they basically were the WordPress? You had it on your Twitter, but I can't remember exactly what it was.
It's some symposium somewhere about some online safety in the UK or whatever. But the
Right.
point is, WordPress doesn't have the mechanical framework to actually do this. WordPress has no way of doing that because they don't have a foundation. They don't
Right.
have a way for power to be dissociated from individuals and become power that everyone subscribes to, right? And this is what the PHP Foundation is doing. This is what other open source projects are doing, because they're realizing it's irresponsible not to do this. Now, the counter argument to this has always been, but everything is working fine the way it is, which is a nonsense argument, because yeah, it is, but it's not due to good governance. It's due to a lot of luck, right? And a lot of the appeal of WordPress itself, but you're also seeing how brittle that is and how easy it is for people to leave. And you're seeing that when you start getting competitors that are actually competitors, it becomes way more difficult.
And I think the WordPress project has been really self-organizing the community, because it has been this kind of tight-knit, friendly, really, community. And as it's gotten bigger, it has gotten more fractured. There's just too much of it to really be able to know all the people in it. And so the self-governance idea of kind of controlling your own thing, it's just too big for that now. Just, there's too many voices and too many people that are doing so many different things, and so many businesses and whatnot that are, based off of it. It was possible before because it was so much more of a tight-knit community. But now we're really seeing, like you just said, the fractures that come along with it. And Automatic is there to step into that position, and they are stepping into it just by default. They're like, okay, well, we're representing WordPress here because there isn't anything.
Well, it falls in line with what Matt said. I mean, I asked him about this ages ago in public, and he said anyone who wants to speak on behalf of WordPress, just step in and do it, right? This is on tape.
I don't know if we want that, though.
Yeah, we don't want that.
No, I know, but that is the way he thinks about it.
Right. That's the meritocracy.
And then when someone tries to do it, it's like, look at my big hammer. I'm going to keep hitting you on the head until you leave with it, right? So it's not like it's very much a lack of understanding of, or a refusal to accept how the world really works, because there's an island called WordPress where everything can be different, right? The problem is the rest of the world is sitting outside and moving on past.
And we're
this
not
moment.
really
So
we're not as much of an island as we were.
That's what really you're seeing with PHP is what you're seeing with a lot of open source projects right now, which is a maturation of the community into realizing, oh, we are infrastructure, we need to behave properly, and we need to be rational about it. The one thing I'm very concerned about is that at some point someone's going to be like, hey, let's make it into a DAO. Let's do Web3. Let's have crypto, blockchain bullshit.
If you look at the State of the Word announcement, they do say
NFTs.
Yeah.
So sad.
Let's hope not.
So sad.
Also
clinging on.
To go back to what Morten said about Matt saying that anybody could act on behalf of WordPress. I mean, I feel like that's such a fucking cop-out, because it's basically like throwing code up on GitHub. Someone files an issue, and then you just get the response, pull request welcome.
Yeah, it's disingenuous nonsense, right? It's a dissociation from how the world works. It just doesn't work.
In my, I always get this conflict when it comes to like Matt, because he really, I really do believe he believes in his own vision.
Absolutely.
And so he has that genuine I think he's earnest. I think that's real, but so I never really want to paint him as a villain. I don't think of him as a villain, but there is something to be said for not listening to all of these voices within the community who keep being like rattling the warning signs and being like, hey, this is a problem. And then the brain drain that results from that when people who are trying to point out real problems, it's falling on deaf ears, and everyone's like, well, this is going, south, and I gotta go, and I can't stay here. And, I think for the project, they're like, fine, go. If you want to stay, stay. If you want to go, go. And that even, I think, erodes the community feel even more, because it doesn't matter if you're there or not. You could be this person or that person. It doesn't matter. And so when you start feeling like you don't matter in the community and your insights or your opinions are irrelevant, then, you don't feel like it's really a community anymore. And I think that at the end of the day, it's always like, well, it's whatever Matt says. Like, that's like living in a patriarchal household where you're like, well, Father has spoken and that is the word. That's what we're doing. Let me ask you a question. What do you think would be the response to other companies other than Automatic or other people forming something under the Open Collective, if we are all able to speak for WordPress our own selves, like forming that? I know there was a push towards that, obviously, with the governance project, or at least a flag waving in that direction. Mm-hmm. But obviously it won't be helped by the structures that are in place because there's no incentive there. But do you think that's possible, just with your little predictor hat on?
Like that the community can step up and make a foundation or make an organization of some kind?
Yeah, and I think that's important. We should not necessarily call it a foundation, because since there is the WordPress Foundation, that really just creates confusion. So let's call it the organization, for .org. Makes sense, right?
Based on my experience, the response will be, this was not, like, unless it passes by Matt's desk and he stamps it for approval, right, it will be discounted as something non-official and therefore something not to be considered, with strong language, because if it has not been approved by the top of the pyramid, it is not official, no matter what you do. And if the whole community, or a large part of it, let's say all the other economic interests got together and did something like this, it would just create a civil war within the community.
And that would result in a power struggle.
It would be, but that power struggle is already happening, right? You see these big hosting companies gobble up anyone who has any power, right? So there's clearly something happening with consolidation of power. And this isn't, I'm not talking about WordPress specifically here. I'm talking about open source. All these companies are realizing that open source is extremely valuable. And more importantly, that having control over specific open source project can help them guide the internet in specific directions, right? So they're all investing heavily in it. And they've realized, instead of trying to inject people into the project, you just buy the people who already have influence. So you're seeing consolidation of power under specific companies. You're seeing investors that are because I've been contacted by investors from outside who are saying, hey, I want you to speak frankly about the WordPress project and whether or not we should invest in it and who we should invest in it. And I'm like, I don't touch this anymore. So whatever, I'll tell you the history of it. So there's clear interest from outside, and that interest has nothing to do with, let's make sure WordPress is a nice, cushy place for people to work in, and everything to do with how can we plug our machine in and siphon as much money as possible out of it, right? And the best way to do that is to control the project. And because it's an open source project, eventually you will get consolidation of control in a couple of points. And if a large group of those outside influencers start working together in a specific direction, you'll create a civil war schism type thing within the community, which will be detrimental to the community, but will result in a bunch of people earning a lot of money. And a way of avoiding this is introducing a proper governance model through some form of foundation-like thing. A way of creating a worse problem is to do something like a DAO, where you say the people who buy, this is I've been on this DAO train for a while now to try to explain to people how idiotic this idea is. Like, a DAO if you were talking about something where you had actual smart contracts in a system that would maintain a car fleet and make sure that everyone gets paid, that's fine. The way DAOs are used right now is to pretend that it's not a stockholder structure, while it in reality is, because you then issue voting coins, right? So the people with the most money get the most control. And then you just have the same thing you already have, except it's now crypto and therefore Web3 and blah, blah, blah. Like it's this. What people aren't seeing is that this entire conversation around all this stuff right now has to do with consolidation of power and deriving money off free labor, right? And that's what all these investors are seeing. Tons of people are giving away their work for free. Can we make money off this? Of course, we're going to put money into it then, right? How do we consolidate that power? So lack of action from the community during a time where nothing is happening is dangerous, because at some point in the future, when something happens, like a key member leaves or some infrastructure breaks or something else, someone will pounce in and just take control, right?
Yeah.
That's depressing as hell.
Sure is. But you know what's not depressing is it's the end of the show.
That's not depressing. That's kind of depressing. There's so much more to say. I did want to
There is
highlight
so
the fact
much.
that I believe Joe Watkins from JetBrains, yes, correct. He's from somewhere. He's in the chat and wanted to say that the foundation just got hurried along because of Nikita leaving. So regardless of whether it was a emergency or not, it's still more than we have over
He's
here
from
in the
PHP.
WordPress world. So from PHP. Sorry. Thanks. Hi, Joe. I have a bad memory. Anyway, so I personally, just to put a happy spin on it, because I like doing that, and it's, holiday weekend. I'd like to believe that something like that is possible. The structure's there, the frameworks are there. Automatic and Matt are obviously understand how important it is for PHP, and maybe the threat of civil war or total, consolidation is, I don't know what the end game is, but I'd like to believe that these things are possible.
And
we're losing passionate people like Morten on the regular right now, but there still are a ton of passionate people out there
right now. There are.
Yeah.
And
right now.
This time in changing, with the full site editing, and so much is changing, and we're really shifting code bases, so much is consolidating. There's so much change happening right now that it really feels like this would be a good time to bring this conversation up again. So,
and super important. All credit to the PHP Foundation for doing this.
Yeah,
everyone who's involved in that needs credit for it, because this is a way of ensuring the longevity of a programming language, and it's very difficult to do. Like what they've done here is an enormous amount of work, and they're embarking on a very difficult journey to make this work. But the end result will be that the people who contribute to the project will end up being paid for their work, which is a really big thing in open source. And hopefully this can lead to other similar open source projects realizing we can make funding models that actually work. Because one of the big critiques of the governance project and anyone who ever brings this up is there's no example of how to do it. And no matter how many times we say, but the OpenJS Foundation is doing it, there's always been it doesn't work for here. The PHP Foundation doing it is much closer to what WordPress is and what Drupal is and what Vue is and what all these other things are. So it provides a viable example that you can then inspect and say, what are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? What can we learn from it? How can we do something similar? So there's definitely a path here. And the PHP Foundation is in many ways forging a path for others to follow. So it's well worth investing both in the foundation itself to keep it going, also look at what they're doing and see how it works to see what can be learned from it.
Awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for hanging out with us, Morten. We really appreciate it. We really do appreciate it. And thank you all for hanging out with us and chatting with us in the chat. We appreciate that as well. Talk to y'all later. You have a good one. Bye-bye. Go over to WPwatercooler.com/subscribe to subscribe to this content and all the content that we put out on the network. You can go over to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and you can even watch us over on YouTube. Talk to y'all later. You have a good one. Bye-bye.